Good evening. Welcome to FMA Discussion. This is episode 306, and tonight we are featuring Maestro Dan Lowman, and he's going to be speaking on Kombatan, Kiro, some compare and contrast. He also has a demo. He brought his friend, partner, training partner, Pat, and so we got a lot of stuff we're going to cover. However, I just want to preempt you guys. This could be a lot because there's also his trips to the Philippines and the weapons, so this could conceivably be a part two. If that is the case, that would be next Wednesday, 8 o'clock. I would definitely do that sooner than later, but we're going to see how it goes. But I just kind of want to pre-warn folks that are watching a lot of content here in question. So instead of squishing it all in and leaving things out, I'd rather do two parts. So, but again, we'll see how it goes. Without further ado, we are going to bring up Maestro and Pat.
Hey guys.
Hey,
how's it going?
Appreciate it, and thank you, Pat, for jumping in for helping him out. So
yeah, it's my student Pat Morris. So he's one of my black belts here. So,
I know, I've heard that name.
Yeah, I think he met you at the camp, Chad Bodie's camp.
There we go. I hear that name.
Friend from there.
All right. All right.
That already wanted that somewhere, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, if you
so I'm good.
yeah, actually. That camp was fun. I'm hoping to make it next year. That was good people.
Yeah, always good. You know, it's always
100%. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah, folks, if you're jumping in, please tell us where you're watching from. Smash that like button. We're just getting started. So before we get into all the good stuff, what was your before we get into FMA and all that, like, what was your prior MMA experience?
So I did
martial arts experience,
like martial arts stuff.
Yeah, just I guess general, like most of us start out traditional or whatever.
Yeah. I started out in Taekwondo.
Same here.
I know. I think everybody does, right? You know, so it's like, it's taught in YMCA's and churches everywhere.
Oh my God, I can't imagine doing those kicks anymore. Ugh.
I know. I got the black belt in that, and I kind of got honestly disillusioned a little bit, between the first and second degree black belt because it's a new Pumse and a new break, So I went to Kempo Karate, Tracy Kempo Karate. And got my black belt in that, and thought I kind of understood what flow was and all that kind of stuff, and then I ran into, Grandmaster Shelley, and then he kind of changed my whole world. He introduced me to Salat, and he introduced me to the FMA world too.
Wow. So what year? So you're going from traditional martial arts. How did that occur where you met him, and how old are you and what year?
It was like the early 2000s, and it was just I just Googled him. I was living in Kansas, and I Googled him. And I think at the time he was like the North America representative of Kombatan, time where we went Midwestern and North America representative. So I can't remember which one he was at the time, but ran into him there. And it was funny because I went to go see him. He had a school, and he actually Googled me, or talked to one of my teachers, or whatever, right? So like did the research on me too, which is, strange. I never had that happen before, right?
But checking you out.
yeah, he was, I guess, But anyway, met him, and he just changed my world. Like I said, he introduced me to the Kombatan in general, right? The FMA stuff, but then he also introduced me to the Salat stuff too, and he got me going there. And it took me a while to really gravitate towards the Salat because I was an idiot. I thought, there's only so many ways you can move your hands, right? And it's true. But it's the concepts that are underneath it that I kept missing. But he kept being patient with me and kept showing me stuff. And eventually I went, oh, this is different,
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I mean, I don't claim to, but when I've been exposed to, I really enjoy it.
I teach it to my guys sometimes, but it's just so political. I just, I'm an
Is
instructor.
it really? Is it really?
Yeah, you didn't notice? No.
In FMA, I could tell you every camp and the politics just by virtue of these interviews. But
so
what?
It is.
I've heard some things in California, but
I don't care enough, really. You know what I mean? Like my heart's in FMA, right? So I don't care enough to really go through the battles of it,
Yeah.
And so I teach my guys. Don't really. I can only teach so much anyway, right? So I kind of keep that on the back burner. It always comes out because it's part of me. But the FMA is the stuff I teach mainly, and I normally try to teach Kombatan first because I find that Kombatan guys, for whatever reason, they can. It's a great art that, like it it has pieces of every other art kind of in it, you know. It has pieces of everything, right? So I find that guys that do Kombatan can do KI, transition KI easier, right? But if I try to go the opposite, if I go take somebody from KI and try to put them into Kombatan, it's like, it's a struggle, you know.
Why do you think that? Interesting.
The double stick too, and the I don't know what it is. It's just, I think it's a double stick, and it's the you know, it's a stick versus a sword, right? So I separate those two things. One's a stick, one's a sword. And if I teach you sword, I'm going to show you sword. You know, I may use the stick to do it, but I have a sword in mind, and I use that. And you know, with Kombatan, it's very much crashing in. You know,
crashing in. Okay.
Yeah, crashing in, taking control, which I think honestly why, you know, the Price's brothers were so good at what they did. You know, if you think about it, if you go to the Philippines, everything is very simplistic. It's very effective, right? But it's very simplistic. So, you know, you may have a system that he does, you know, you go to one grandmaster and go, oh, do you have an Espadaga system? He goes, no. You know, I just do Ocho and Bond or whatever, right? Whatever he calls it, right? And then 5 years later, he may come back and he may have it now, but because of the, you know, the work, you know, getting more money or whatever. But it's just, I don't know, it's just the way it is. It's just simple that way, you know. And I think, you know, if people that treat an object like a sword, if you not get too much details, but if you're cutting through, hitting like that, you know, you can take that all day long. But if you're hitting like with the blunt end of the stick, like a stick, if you're hitting like that, it hurts, you know. And so if somebody's not used to having their stick grabbed, that changes your whole world. You know, if you're not used to having somebody crash in and just beat you, you know, then that would surprise a lot of people. And I think that's why they may have been successful, you know, at first in the Philippines. Obviously, they're great skilled martial artists too, right?
Yeah,
but
the family.
Yeah, but slicing through, that's my big pet peeve in the U.S. sometimes, in Europe too, is that people say it's, you know, the stick is a sword or a sword is a stick, but it's one or the other to me, right?
Yeah.
And the motions aren't the same. If you swing at me like a sword, if you're doing center wise with me or whatever like that, I can make that stick almost hit you in the head, you know, because of the bounce off of it, you know, the way it's swung. But anyway.
Okay. So, you know, as far as you know, the three brothers and all that, I guess, you know, what made Ernesto different and unique?
So Ernesto was like, a lot of people don't know this, but there was 5 brothers, right? And 2 of them died when they were like,
okay.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, but they died when they were like in teens, right? But then the ones that survived, everybody knows about is obviously is Grandmaster Remy, right? He was the older one. He was like 10 years older than Ernesto, right? So, you know, pretty good age gap between there. And then GM Ernesto and then Roberto would be the younger one of the group, right? And I think if you look at the development of their systems, when GM Remy, you know, I mentioned this yesterday on the call, right? When we were talking, he said the 2 arts, a lot of people think they're similar because they're Price's brothers, right? And they're all different. You know, the arts really are different. You know, they're not really the same, honestly. Yeah, I can see the difference because I know how. I just know the difference between Kombatan, right? So I'm taking that perspective from that view versus taking a modernese view from it. But I think he stayed in the Philippines, and I've heard stories from grandmasters that he trained with that he still constantly trained. You know, he was about preserving the art, but preserving the Filipino art in general, and continuing to train. You know, so he had great relationships with all these grandmasters, and he stayed. You know, yes, he went to Europe, he went to Australia, and spread the art there too, right? But he focused really on. He was a fighter, you know, very much a fighter still, and you know, all the way up to the 80s and 90s, and then he, you know, but he focused on preserving the art too, you know. And I think, you know, I can't speak for Grandmaster Remy because I'm not one of his students or anything, right? But you know, it seems like that was more the seminar circuit, you know, and more, you know, teaching art within the art and spreading the art here in the U.S. You know, obviously it's spread around the world too, but just different.
Yeah,
arts.
I mean, you know, and the thing about what's really unique is I always heard Modernese, and but I didn't really get a great grasp as far as just the impact he had on the West. You know, how much he got to schools. I mean, I heard the term Modernese, but that didn't mean anything. Yeah. Kombatan didn't hear anything about, so I started doing these interviews.
Yeah, no, because Kombatan kind of, you know, Remy's kind of took control of the U.S., you know, and that was kind of an understood thing, and you know, and Ernesto and Roberto kind of took the rest of the world, and they were happy with that, right? You know, and so, It's funny. I was kind of laughing, because I did the traditional Taekwondo and I did the Kempo karate and everything. And I remember the big 3 seminars going around, right? And I could have easily got roped into that world, And, no offense to the Montanese guys at all, but I'm so happy I didn't, because my teacher I have now, I'm so happy that I have him as a teacher, and I could be going in a completely different route,
Right,
not that it would be a bad route, but it's different. Yeah.
Who was the big 3? It was, you had Remy, and then you had
Wally J, and then George Dillman.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I heard about the seminars, and I almost went a couple of times, and but I just never did, So I kind of, like I said, nothing against the Modernese guys or anything, but I could have easily ended up being a Modernese guy. I'm glad I'm not, because I'm happy doing the Kombatan stuff.
Yeah, right. I mean, just by virtue of you being in the traditional martial arts, I mean, you could have been easily gone that pathway.
Yeah, because it was popular. It's hugely popular.
Yeah. I mean,
impact here in the States.
It was so. I tell you though, they definitely, like, for instance, in Connecticut, like, I never knew that Myronese was the first ethnic kind of that got into Connecticut. It's just amazing. Just the impact that he's had. I mean, and all that. So with regards to Kombatan, I mean, like, if you were to describe to somebody, like, in other words, we kind of talked about this in the test run, it has an association with double sticks. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but when you do talk to people, that does come up. And they have I think that kind of was unique in the Philippines a little bit too, because everybody did single stick or they did sword or whatever like that, so it was a way to separate themselves. But I think, you get the double stick, and you get, not all the Sinawali's, right? But you get the double stick defenses, and there's quite a few, depending on which era. There's errors in time, with when Gregor Master Ernesto was teaching, and as the art kind of evolved, so some systems have, like, lots of Sinawali's, from anywhere from, like, 10, which doesn't seem like a lot, right? 10 is not a lot, really, but then to 40 to 100, right? And I think sometimes that gets a little bit too much, right? Because the concepts can be learned a little bit less, probably. And same with the double defenses, you may end up be from 40 to 20, and it's interesting because I've gone through curriculums with Grandmaster Shelley. The curriculums have changed over the years, because as he changes, right, as a teacher. And I remember some of the curriculums were huge. There was like 44, I think, double stick defenses that I learned, And to me, I'm like, I don't need all those, right? I can probably do it in 20. And now we've reduced it down to 20. But I'm glad I went through all the 44, But sometimes when you get the curriculum's too big, you lose the fighting ability, right? Because the drills are definitely internet. So hopefully he'll come back. All right, what can I talk about? Yes, folks. Raffle. Benefit Jesse. Those who don't know, all of his equipment from FNA Pulse just got stolen, unfortunately. So we're doing a raffle at the end of the month to try to raise money so he can get new equipment. So here is the flyer. I think it's pinned at discussion. Yeah, it's definitely. So check that out. Again, I think it's $10 a ticket, 3rd to the 31st. Really good prices. Bram Frank came through with over about $100 with the knives he donated. Some folks, really good stuff. Hopefully, next. Yes, perfect. Okay. He was back. Internet. Here we go. Oh, no worries. No worries.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what I'm on now. Hold on.
Yeah, I figured you just had a quick internet glitch or something.
Yeah, let me close this other one here.
Oh. Try it again. There we go. All right.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Oh yeah.
Sorry, I overheated. My laptop overheated. So
Oh yeah, that's right. Like, what's the temps down there now?
it's like, I don't know, 90 degrees or something. And I'm in the garage because I want to do the demo with him, right?
90 degrees at night. Welcome to Florida.
Yeah, it's like the Philippines right now.
Gosh, oof. And I'm sure it's no humidity either, right?
Yeah, none at all, right? So I'm sweating it out. Yeah, so it probably overheated. So that's probably what happened here.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, one time I had the phone do that. It was in the window, and I'm doing it, and I was like, "What the hell is happening?" It overheated.
Yeah.
So we were on.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, Alex.
I think we were talking about Ernesto, like what made, as far as like part of the aspect of the world, like he was mostly covering. I'm sure obviously he has some reps here.
He did have some reps there, like Tim was saying here, that he did have some reps on the West Coast, right? So he was here too, right?
Okay. And we were kind of on the subject that mostly known for his double sticks and all that. However, doesn't fully entail.
Yeah, it doesn't incorporate Kombatan like you were saying, right? So we have those double stick defenses and everything, but we have the spotted daga systems too that we have, which covers the Negro style of a spotted daga, and then you have the classical. The classical systems aren't classical meaning like old style necessarily, but it's the long Largo stuff, right? Okay. You have stuff like your doubletes, your more traditional strikes are incorporated in that, and then your Harada patterns and your Police patterns. So that'll be incorporated in that. And then you have your daga, your daga sadaga stuff as well, as long as it's also with the modern stuff too, right? So you get the more the close in stuff. So it's covering all three ranges basically, right? Whether you have single stick, double stick, or whatever, it really doesn't matter,
So all right, so far as like the progression for students and all that, are they starting out with single?
So I started them out with single, and double too, right? So I started them out kind of with double stick, the basic double stick, and then I moved them to the modern right away, and then I kind of moved them to the classical afterwards. But you could probably mix that order up a little bit, depending on the teacher. But typically you're learning the double stick first because I want to get both your hands working, right? So, our double stick is, either hand can be the blocker or the defender, right? So everything you do with the right hand, you end up doing with the left hand. And so you'll learn some center wallets and double stick, and then you'll start going into the modern stuff, the modern aspects of it, the catchings. And that's something that's kind of Kombatan, like especially the older style will catch the stick a lot, and so you'll hear, it's funny, I hear all kinds of stuff, the stick's too fast, you can't catch it or whatever, right? And absolutely 100% you can. It's one of those things you practice. And if I miss, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to hit you, so there's a counter for it. If I miss, it doesn't really matter. But there's absolutely, you can absolutely catch a stick. It's something you have to practice, and there's angles you have to take, and certain things you have to do to make that happen. If you're, and we practice it full blown. So if somebody's swinging a full blown stick at you, you should be able to catch that, right? So you have to get used to that. Your blocks have to be right. There's so many times where people don't practice under pressure, and the blocks aren't there, and you just end up getting hit with your own stick.
Yeah, right. If you're not really putting some oomph behind it on your blocks, and then all of a sudden it bounces off your head.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, I think at one time or another we've all experienced that, right?
yeah, but the double stick helps your empty hand too, because you end up blocking solid. It's silly, but little angles, difference in the angle of your block can determine where that angle gets crashed in. Somebody's hitting it hard, or the same thing with your blocks and your empty hand. It's just the difference in your angle can determine whether you get hit or not.
Right. Okay. So then, all right. So you're starting out single, double, pending the instructor. You mentioned some other terms there that I'm not familiar with, as far as what encompasses in the system.
Which terms?
I believe one started with the D. I hope.
A spotty daga or?
No. There was another one.
Daga sadaga or? There we go. Yeah. Dagger against or knife against empty hand, knife against knife.
So you said dagger. Okay, I thought.
So there's a full knife system. And the thing about Gregor Master Ernesto, he trained there's different levels of knife system within our system. There's stuff that he would teach the military, the stuff that he would teach the public. And our knife stuff is very very simplistic, but it's honestly some of the best knife I've seen and been exposed to. It's not very flashy. I think sometimes in FMA we we get a little crazy with our knife.
Way too overboard with all the drilling and knife and what you think. Yeah, no argument here, especially when it comes to empty hand versus knife.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Might not,
Yeah, I think that's another thing too.
Off.
Ranging, so the understanding the largo, the long range, the medium, and the short range, and understanding what range you need to be at for certain weapons and how to control the range is important. So a lot of systems they go right into medium range immediately, right? And they don't really have a largo, and they'll say, well, eventually gets into medium or whatever. It's kind of like the old Brazilian jiu-jitsu thing. It always ends up on the ground or whatever, right? But if you have somebody that can control largo, and you can control whether somebody comes in or not, or you can control when you want to come in, that's all those aspects are important. And then knowing how to crash in or what to do when somebody crashes in on you, is important. What weapons are available to you. And that's why I think the classical is important to know.
This is so interesting. Again, I'm not claiming, have much information on it, just other than what I've heard by virtue of the interviews.
Right.
I wasn't even aware that they did knife. You know what I mean? I thought that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So our knife, like I said, our knife stuff is basic, but when I say basic, I don't mean easy. It's just very direct. And everything range is taken into that aspect always. And that's what I think. What I appreciate about KI, was that when I went to Kiro and then with Arnold knows all those guys, it just reinforced. It taught me something different about range, right? But it reinforced what I was doing already in my Kombatan, because, Negros being a sword art too, especially when you get into some of the spotty dagger, the ranging has to be there too, or you get hit, right? You get stabbed with the dagger, you get stabbed with the sword, or whatever, right? So that ranging has to take place, so then the KI just reinforced that and it expanded that even better for me.
So then all right, so far as the modules or facets of the system, you got single double stick, you got spotty dagger, you got obviously dagger and dagger, empty hand versus dagger. Anything else?
Got mono, so empty hand, against empty hand. You've got staff, we'll do staff as well too. Then is that missing anything?
Well, of course, all the double defense, double stick stuff.
Yeah, double stick. Yeah, we already did that. Center wall and double. So
sword.
Yeah, sword.
Sword. Okay. Wow, I tell you, that's something, because that's amazing. I mean, it sounds like to me what you guys are saying over there, it's a complete full system.
Yeah, and you think about what they were trying to do. Ernesto in general and Remy was trying to do this too. They're trying to reinvigorate the Filipino martial arts. And I think Ernesto,
they did it.
Yeah, I think Ernesto really did that because he kept so much of the arts that were involved in Filipino martial arts in general, and within Kombatan.
So, with regards to the family, was this kind of something that was handed down to him by virtue of father?
Yeah, he learned from his father and his grandfather too. So him and Roberto both, and I'm sure Remy did too. So yeah, in Negros in general, like I said, if you visit Negros, you'll see certain movements, and a spotty daga is a core system there. So you'll see a lot of a spotty daga there. You'll see a lot of Harada is there, so Harada movements, things based off that Harada movement, The stances will be interesting. I saw this when I was in Dumaguete. It was the weirdest thing I ever saw. And Shelley was telling us that, Grandmaster Shelley was telling us that Grandmaster Ernesto would call them butt pushers, or I think Alex said this too. They're butt pushers, but when they did the center wall, they would push their butt out and everything would be scrunched. It was the weirdest thing to watch, and yeah. And if you can imagine, if you were underneath a stilted house, and you had to lower yourself and do everything is right in front of you and everything, your butt was sticking out. I had never seen that in my entire life, and I saw it in Dumaguete, so obviously it was a existing thing, but the stances, our stances are a little more karate based, so Ernesto had a background in karate too, right? So, and judo and a bunch of other stuff, aikido and a bunch of other stuff, right? So the stances are more karate based, which make a whole lot more sense, to teach than they would the butt scooting for one, And in Negros, I don't see the butt scooting very much in Negros at all.
That's funny. They were butt scooting. So then, I mean, So at this point, though, when you're like at this point, you've only are just doing Kombatan, right? This is pre-Kiro, pre anything else. You're just getting Kombatan and some C-lot from.
Yeah. I'm training mainly just with Shelly, right?
Okay,
So
okay.
Shelly's my world right now. Always has been, right? So he's been my main teacher. And he introduced me to Alex Ursha, who's here on the call too. And Alex Ursha is another original student of Great Grandmaster Ernesto too, right? So
Directly under
he's
him.
there
Okay,
around,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
So he's a huge resource. I met Alex in 2012 when we went to the Philippines as a group. It was me, Shelly, June, a couple other people. And we met Alex. And that's the first time I ever met Alex face to face. But he ended up hanging out with us for like 2 weeks. It was great, So
And you got that June character, huh?
Yeah. June's been part of the group too. Shelly has.
That guy kills me, man. That guy's fun.
Shelly has three. Well, he has Vince, who's a senior master out in Kansas right now, right? And he's kind of semi-retired a little bit, teaching mainly the police right now. And then you have me, June, and a guy named Damon Abram, right? We're the three masters that Shelly has, right? And we have a great relationship with all three of us. And what I love about that relationship, if you ask June, like, who's senior, he's going to say Dan and Damon. If you ask me who's senior, I'm going to say Damon and June. Right. and same thing for, we got to rank at the same time, but we all started at different times. We know, right, who started first or whatever, but it doesn't matter to us. Right.
Yeah, sounds nice. Yeah.
No,
some of you guys got a nice group there. Yeah.
Shelly's always instilled on us, never worry about rank. Just the skill level is the thing that matters the most. So
can't argue that. Okay, so you mentioned, you know what? Maybe let's do some demos, and then I can kind of put the other questions in after this.
Yeah, we can do that.
You guys.
So get where you can see a little bit.
Yeah, I'll lower myself too, and you guys will have you just tell me when, and I'll lower myself, and then come back up when you guys are done. So
let me know if not loud enough.
Any questions here? Raymond Floro, my man. Ray.
I mentioned that there's a Largo system to it, right? So you still hear me okay? So there's a Largo system to it. So in the long range, you'll learn the classical, right? So classical strikes, you start learning classical strikes, right? And you'll see the deeper stances that go by. So it could be, you may want slow. We're learning to break the hands. Sometimes we'll retract. Sometimes we'll go through it. And the gross is very common. They go all the way through just for the practicing of it. And you see the stance goes a little bit deeper so I can get the reach. You'll see that. If the left hand comes, you'll see that's coming to medium range too. But the most common when you're learning Largo is to go out here first, right? So you're out here and then bring the right foot forward. So if you're to see that, you see it here first, and then you see the strike coming, right? So again, you're clearing it. If I go, this is where KI would reinforce this for me, right? So the right hand comes, I'm already getting that range out and getting the range to hit. If it comes to the left again, I'm already out range to here, and then comes back with the right foot. And you'll see a very right lead forward for the range. Not that they won't go left lead forward, they certainly will, right? So you'll see that. So we talked about, this is clearly stick, right? So I'm getting smashing and coming through. The common motions you'll see in the gross are the rectaves. So you see you'll see the rectaves coming through, so double strikes, right? You'll see some beats coming through. So some beats as you come through. You'll see the blotters are popular, right? So the blotters coming through here. You'll see with six or with ticks if you're thinking KI. So right now we're clearly using this, right? But if you look at the gross styles, they'll use a Taliban, right? So big strikes low. There's my strike. There's my strikes coming through. My sangeets. Everything will still be there. You'll still see my lift systems coming through and hitting. Every now and then KI comes out, unfortunately. I can same idea. Back, strike, sangeets. So you see that from the sword motions. Hard is getting loud, guys. Then you'll see a Spati Daga. Your traditional dagger would be this length, right? So we practice, obviously everybody practices with short daggers, right? For practicality, because most people don't have long daggers. So you'll see a spotty dagger, you'll see our spotty dagger motions coming through. So you'll see dagger motions coming through, right? Whatever it is, right? So you'll see that start to come through. So obviously, when you start going hand in hand with that, strikes come, right? You'll start applying that second hand. That second hand starts becoming more alive, if that makes sense. So that's what I mean about learning the Spada Daga, you know, as it goes through there. So, any questions on that part?
No, I mean, I definitely see the parallel that you were talking about as far as Kiro and all that.
Yep.
Let me just see here. You mentioned, of course, if there's more you guys want to show, please do. You mentioned over the time periods in the pre-talk, you know, that things change within the decades.
Yep.
How and why?
So you'll see different things. Like if you talk to Alex Ursha, like I always talk to seniors, right? Is that too loud? Somebody's doing a.
No, it's fine.
If you talk to like some of the seniors, which I always do, I always ask questions. So they'll say like they only learn maybe 5 Sinawallis, 10 Sinawallis, right? So, and that within that, that's all they really need to know, right? So, and everything is focused more on drill, right? So the drilling is the most important part if the drilling is done correctly, right? As art kind of expanded, people started going, you know, for the black belt test, they would create more Sinawallis. So, you know, new Sinawallis would get created, new double defenses would get created, you know. I'll give you an example. So with double defense, the blete motion is 2 circles down, right? Two small circles like that, right? So that could be one double defense. If you wanted to add to that, you could do a reverse doublette, a reverse doublette up, a reverse backwards doublette up, a horizontal doublette up, and now you got like 4 or 5 extra double defenses, right? You really don't need that, right? But I'm glad I learned it, because if I didn't tell you that as a teacher, you would have to discover that. So sometimes it's just laid out for you, right? Okay. And I think if you look at this, is not a criticism at all. It's just an observation. If you look at some of the more modern Kombatan, it's very fast and it's very flashy, but not so much the hard-hitting drilling stuff, right? So the smashing part, the coming through and beating, you know, it's super important. You notice when I hit, I try to hit, you know, medium hard, and, you know, trying to get used to him getting hit, you know, what it's like to really have somebody strike at you. So we're less concerned with how much we know and more concerned with how do we apply it, you know? How can we apply it more efficiently with more testing it out, right? More pressure. Pressure is very important to us. You know, pressure testing, because a simple thing like this, you know, let me stand up one more time for a second.
Sure, I'll lower myself. Sure.
Yeah. Simple thing like this, if you get thing one slow, that's what's going to happen. It's going to crash, right? And if you're out here like this, you know, one thing is from Timbuktu, I'm not going to crash, right? But I need to learn how to crash. He swings a little harder, that could happen. And I crash, right? He starts swinging a little harder. I get used to grabbing that, right? He swings even harder. Grab, I miss. There you go. Grab, I grab, right? So that's testing me up all kinds of stuff. I can get my classical inside there. I can do whatever I want, right? Thinking the backhand, I'm used to that, grabbing that and getting that versus swing slow. You know, versus that's beginner, right? I need to learn when he swings that puppy up, I need to learn how it feels like to really grab that and take that stick from him. Does that make sense? So pressure testing constantly for us. And we have drills to do that.
I think pressure testing as a whole in the community, I think lacks, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
You know,
it depends what people want too. Some people don't want that, right?
No. If they want just the art, yeah. And I, you know, in terms of the journey, if they're happy, you know, that's perfect. But if you were to look at pressure testing and its aspect across the global community,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something. But like much to your point, if you don't want it, right? Who's to say that you should do it or should have it? You know?
Yeah, it's a struggle because when I go to seminars or I teach or I go and do whatever, that's the first thing I look at is, can it be pressure tested, right? Are these guys can they really pull it off? Because that's what I want, right? Shelley always instilled that in us. If it doesn't work, why keep it, right? So I always want to see if it works. I always want to pressure test it, and that means that means
Yeah, I'm with that. Like I don't have time, man. And again, nothing against people who want the art. That's great. That makes you happy. It gets you motivated off the couch. It's still, man, God bless. However, though, like if I'm spending time away from whatever I'm doing or other facets of life, I want to make sure what I'm doing is going to work. Like I just don't have time for it. Just to be honest.
And you notice too, a little segue here is that you notice that the Debleti movement, people call things different things. It's all kinds of different dialects, right? They'll call, KI calls things like a doblata for us is redonda to them, right? So they'll call, it's just different. It's just a name. And sometimes people, when I first started the FMA with Grandmaster Shelley, I would ask him questions sometimes and I go, is it this or this? And he would respond, yes. Because sometimes it matters, sometimes it doesn't matter, right? So, he wanted me to break away from the structure. Sometimes as foreigners in the States, we always want structure. We want movements A, B, C, and D, to happen. And it doesn't happen that way in real combat. Real combat's very dynamic, right?
Yeah,
so we have that 1, 2, 3 kind of mentality. So again, it's pressure test, pressure test, pressure test. And the Deblete thing I was talking about here, so that motion, we talked about this last night. Let me get this right because it's, like I said, humid out here. I'll start sweating here. So with the Negros, hello Arnold, how you doing, Coach? So with Cebu and Negros, very heavy Espada Daga. Right now, there's not in other regions, right? But they're known for those. They're known for that. Well, if you look at a Negros sword like this Taliban, right? It's about the length of the stick. I got this from Marshall, who's unfortunately passed away and died, but this is a Taliban, right? So it's, I don't know, it's about the same length of a stick, basically, same length as a stick or whatever, right? It's 28 inches or so. So that a Deblete motion is a Sangeet motion is very easy with this, So if I look at people, certain motions, this sword will do this motion. If I grab a garab, like a garab is from, this one's from Samar, a garab is this. It's not going to do that Deblete motion. It's going to feel like it's going to feel like a foreign, not that you couldn't force it, but it just does not want to do it.
It's just not going to flow as well.
No, it doesn't want to do it, right? And the same thing if I did a Zanzibar, in KI, they don't have that Deblete motion, right? So certain motions will happen. So back to my comment before with swords is in America, we've gotten so, again, a blanket statement here. Yeah, it's so generic that this stick represents every sword known to man, and it's gotten to be like that, right? And every system, so this stick cannot represent every single sword.
How could it? I mean, you're talking about different, wider belly, thicker spines, lengths, curvatures.
Yeah, exactly, right? So there's so many things that go into it, right? So this is my comment that if you look at certain styles, and there's no criticism of them, but FMA is notorious for not telling the truth about your origin stories, right? The great-grandfather did this or whatever, blah, 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 and not that some isn't true. It's just that I look at some people doing things and I go, oh, your style's from Negros, for instance, right? Let's use that as an example. It could be Samar, it could be Cebu or anything. And I'm familiar with Negros. So if you look at it and you tell me you're doing Negros style and I see you're not, then it's pretty obvious to me because the motions you're doing aren't from that sword, So, and the same thing, if a person says, they came from guerrillas that were in, Cebu or Samar or whatever, and they go, our system's from those guerrillas. And I go, oh, that's interesting. Here's your sword from this island. You do your motion, and the motion doesn't fit. So again, that tells me there's a disconnect. right?
So the disconnect, though, here's the thing. I mean, as there's been, we have a few disconnects in the community, what have you. But as far as that disconnect you're speaking on, so is it the student who maybe didn't take upon their own to find out, or maybe the instruction wasn't really relayed?
I don't know. It could have been both,
Or both. Right. Yeah.
Stories are stories,
You know what I mean? Because
Philippine culture,
do you take upon yourself own responsibility for your journey to know as much as humanly possible about everything in that system? I think some are reluctant to do that, and they just rely on the teacher.
They do. And sometimes the teacher, this from traditional karate, right? Is that kata motions, this is the kata motion. And, my teacher told me this is what this kata motion means. So this is what it means, and of course you're going to trust your teacher because your teacher's, your teacher.
It's like you go in a doctor's office, you're going to listen, generally speaking, you're going to listen to the doctor.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's not that they're trying not to be truthful about it, but sometimes that's what they were told and they never did their own research. So it goes back to my comment before, but I'm trying to reverse engineer, my Kombatan, right? So some people look at their art and go, okay, where is my weakness, right? And then they go, okay, my art doesn't do this very well. So I want to, fill that gap or whatever, right? I really don't feel like there's holes like that within Kombatan. I think it's a very complete art. I really do. Especially it's depending on how it's taught, right? And Grandmaster Shelley teaches it that way, and that's why he's so important to me. But if you go on, I'm trying to figure out, okay, why did Great Grandmaster take this piece of this and put it into Kombatan? Why is it there? And if I can understand, because this obviously is some Blintawak there. A lot of the modern guys do Blintawak because it's obviously there's some Blintawak.
Yeah, no, that's been said on interviews that Blintawak is definitely modernese.
Yeah, same thing for us. Our close-in stuff looks Blintawakish. It's different. It doesn't look like modern, really, honestly, too. It's depending on who does it, right? But again, there's that there. So if you study Blintawak, you might understand modern better, right? And same thing if you practice a close-in art, you may learn it better, right? I do KI because I know Great Grandmaster trained in KI. So I want to know, okay, what did he want to learn out of KI? Yeah, what did he learn out of KI, and how can I make my Kombatan better? But obviously too, I'd be an idiot not to train with Arnold because he's such a great teacher. To be perfectly honest.
Right. Yeah, definitely. We got some. Chris Chu. I'm missing a ton of these comments. I just want to make sure I'm just not missing any.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I'm sure people have questions and stuff.
Ray, pressure testing. Ray, we know I'm gonna be here, Maestro Ray. We've had talks on that. Can you talk about your method of pressure testing? I think that's the only question I missed.
So I don't want to give too much away, right? Because there are our own system, but I'll give you an example of it real quick, right? That without giving too much away, right? So
sure. I will lower myself. Right floor. Non-tap.
This is one of our drills. I won't really dissect it too much, but he'll give an angle 1, he'll give an angle 2, he'll give an angle 1 again, right? And we'll practice it where he'll go 1, 2, 3, right? I screw up, I mess up, right? So he goes 1, 2, 3, I come in and practice it. Then he goes 1, 2, there I gotta go grab it, right? So now he doesn't know what I'm really grabbing. Okay, I can grab on any of those, right? So that's some of the drill, okay, not the whole drill, right? But that's how I would pressure test that drill, is because I want him swinging full on me, but not telling me what he's swinging. It's real easy if I go, okay, 1, 2, 3, there. And 1, 2, 3 again, 1, 2, 3 again. Just get that angle 1 and practice like that, but that's not very dynamic, right? So that's what I mean by pressure testing as an example, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah, makes sense to me. Okay, so we just spoke on the changes throughout the decades, basically how it evolved, pending, what was added, what have you. You mentioned yesterday about the reverse engineering. I'd like to talk on that. The whole thing about you speaking on the reverse engineering. It sounds like you're making this, what I mean, known for sure, as far as your students are concerned. Is that
not telling my students I'm doing that, or?
Yeah, like you're doing the reverse engineering, I'm guessing, to benefit your students. Am I correct in
No,
that?
for me.
For you. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of that. So, yeah, I don't care about these guys.
Cool. Them?
So, I'll go to Negros and so here's a good example is that I'm trying to understand movement and why certain events happen. And sometimes I don't have an answer to it because sometimes the person that put it together, Cristino Vasquez is a good example, right? He put together a lot of our Espada Daga, right? Originally it was 12 angles of Espada Daga. We have 15 Espada Dagas total, right? And 12 angles there's 12 because there's 12 angles, right? And they were putting us through a certain format for a certain reason. And I used to think because if you look at our format, I'll stand up one more time. Sorry.
Sure.
If you look at our format of 1, 2, 3, just that part right there, that's very Lightning Scientific-ish, right? So it looks like Lightning Scientific. Lightning Scientific will do it. They'll do even 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? But they'll obviously do it with a combo and everything else, right? Well, I thought to myself, okay, maybe that came from LSI, and it was some Negros styles formatted within that format because it was common. And then I go to Negros and I see that same motion. I see some of this stuff in Negros where people are doing like this, right? And I see that motion over and over again. And I'm going, okay, well, it's in Negros. And I talk to these teachers and I go, Felix Guanabo was one of them that I saw the motion from. And I go, do you know Great Grandmaster Ernesto? Do you know any of his teachers? And they kind of came up, different teachers, same motion. But if you look at that 1, 2, 3, that's very Australia looking, right? If you make it more sword, right? So again, I'm looking at myself, where is the connection there? Why is that there? And then I look at Sangeet's and doblete motions, the hand motions. I look at stances. Where is the similarity? And I'm trying to figure out where did my roots come from?
Okay.
And if I can understand my roots, my Kombatan grew hugely by going to Negros and seeing how the footwork was different there and how they moved with their footwork. And it made me appreciate my own footwork. And I tied into Kombatan, KI even more, and it makes it even stronger, So I know there's an influence there. So I start incorporating those styles or those ideas into my own style. And that's what I mean by reverse engineering. Right. Okay. It's not taking like it's not like freestyle karate or something like that where I'm taking some jiu-jitsu locks, I'm going to take some the Brazilian jiu-jitsu and tie it all together. It's literally ideas and concepts I'm going to tie together. And they're all within Kombatan in general, And that's why, sometimes you get too flashy, you get too caught up in the double stick stuff. The double stick stuff's great. You get too caught up in that, you miss the other stuff. You're missing the other stuff that Great Grandmaster Ernesto put into it, and it made it
question.
Engineering.
Hold on, Maestro. A question just came in.
Yep.
Okay, how much of what you teach is grounded in the art and the preservation of the art versus how much of it is rooted in self-defense and why?
Yeah. So everything to me is going to be self-defense, right? It's all going to be fighting aspects. I look at more of like the fighting aspects of it more than the self-defense aspect of it, because this is going to sound really cocky and arrogant, okay? And I don't mean it this way, but I'm going to say it the way because it's the only thing that makes sense to me. So when I trained with Great Grandmaster Shelley, right? All right, Grandmaster Shelley. Let me get this straight. So I trained with Grandmaster Shelley. He was always about pressure testing and stuff. So, when we were in Kansas City, we did a lot of live stick fighting, and all this kind of stuff as a group, separately and together and all this. So he would always instill that take over the fight, that fighter mentality, because again, he's trying to bring out the fighting aspects of the art. He's not trying to make us killers or anything like that, as far as like arrogant, Cobra Kai kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But he's trying to make us fighters. So he's done a really good job of that. So he promoted me to master like 7 years ago, right before I came to Florida, and I got associated with all these people in Florida. And then I had to worry about, when you're a younger belt, you don't have to worry so much about politics and everything, right? Now you have to worry about everything I say represents, even here on this call, right? Everything I say represents my teacher. Gotcha. So I have to be careful what I say sometimes, right? That I don't give a poor representation. But anyway, my point is this, I used to tell Grandmaster Shelley, I said, you've made us killers Okay. But now you want me to be this benevolent master, right?
Like now you got to tone everything down because you're high up.
And it's hard. Yeah. It's hard sometimes, right? You know, as you get older,
what do you mean? Try hard FMA discussion. What do you mean it's hard?
You still think you're young, you know, and you can do all this stuff, right? But that's the mentality, is that takeover, you know, that take over the fight mentality is very much in me, you know, in everything I do. But it
looks like he did a good job instilling that in you. You know?
Yeah, he did. And I think that's too. Some of the older style of Kombatan is like that, right? So if you look at some of the older guys, you know, like Alex Hirsch is a great example here, right? I met Alex, you know, 2012ish, right? And I came up on stories of Alex Ursha, right? And I don't want to brag about Alex Ursha or anything like that, but he was like stories of him being, you know, a great fighter and a fighter at the drop of a hat and all this kind of stuff, right? So I met him, you know, and he's older, wiser, kinder Alex now, but it's still in him, you know. And I've seen it a couple of times come out of him, right? And so it's still there too. But that's the kind of mentality, Ernesto, the old style of Kombatan, which we try to represent, is in us. So we're very much aggressive, you know, not mean or arrogant or anything like that, but very much aggressive in the way we approach our self-defense, right? So that's important for us to maintain that through our drills, that pressure testing, you know, and not just teach it as quote an art, you know. It's that it doesn't. Everybody's not going to be a killer. We don't want to make killers out of everybody.
Yeah, right.
That constant pressure test has to be there.
I agree. Especially those short, sharp things. You know.
Yeah. Mila asked, you know, does Kombatan focus on the fight? It does, you know. So it definitely does. You know, the way we train it is, you know, because the pressure testing is constantly there. You know, you're not thinking twice about having a stick swung at you. You know,
because of the fact that you guys are trying to close in, whether you're going at the first beat, second beat, third beat.
It's like having a real punch thrown at you. You know,
it's true, right. I mean,
having a knife stabbed at you, it's pretty. You know.
I'm liking it, man. I'm liking the way you are articulating the whole thing about pressure testing and showing it. No argument here. Ooh, I think we got enough. No, you answered this one. Yeah. Oh, wait. No, this is different. I'm sorry. Have you been able to track the success to failure ratios of the skills you teach as it pertains to self-defense? What are your highest percentage skills you teach?
I haven't tracked any of that. I just hit. You know, if it works, it doesn't work, right? Yeah. So they haven't failed me, you know, and, you know, the basic strikes are always going to be your basic ones, you know. Gotcha. Taking over the fight and just grabbing that stick is probably my number one thing, you know.
Just getting in there, controlling his weapon.
Yeah. Somebody asked about Payette, right? So I didn't get a chance to go. I was supposed to go to Payette this last trip, and I didn't get a chance to do it because my schedule got too busy. But I have gotten experience through the Payette styles from Vos Payette, who's wonderful in Fort Lauderdale, right? Wonderful, you know, reference there. And then also Anthony, that's one of my friends from Payette, right? He does IT as well. And when I go to Makati, we normally have dinner or lunch together or something, right? So, and then Alex Hirsch obviously is good with Payette styles as well too. So again, they'll reinforce what I get from those styles is reinforcing the range for me, you know, and understanding, seeing and sensing it, right? So when they go, I like the slow format that they do. Again, I'm no expert in Laguna styles at all, right? But from when I play with it, from my little bit of understanding of it, I like when they go slow because there's a sense of something, right? So what I mean by that is that you can stand in front of somebody and sense whether they can hit you or not, right? It's just something that you get too used to over time. I can go, okay, he can reach me, you know, with that stick, or he can reach me with that punch, or he can reach me with that. I just know, you know, and yes, I still have the obstacle I can perform to get out of the way a little bit, right? But I just know instantly. What I mean by that is that if I stand up for a second, again, you get out of the way, right? So he's right there, right? So I know right here, I'm getting hit, right? So he extends that. We're not talking about leaning or anything like that. He clearly got me, right? So that's, you know, just stay where you're at again, right? So I go right here, I know I don't get hit. I just instinctively know I don't get hit. Does that make sense? There you go. Until he leans, right? Got my glasses. So it's that instant you just kind of know, right? And it's the same thing with a punch. It's the same thing with a knife or whatever. You just instinctively learn that over time. So I like the way the format that they play with that. Some people say, oh, they do it slow or loud. Those are good styles. They understand range very, very well.
Okay.
And again, it reinforces what I already do in KI. It reinforces what I do in Kombatan at all. I give all them credit. I learn different pieces from each one, so they're all influences in my training.
Nice. We're definitely going to be part 2. We're at the hour mark, and we haven't gone to Kiro, the compare and contrast.
Yeah.
So, folks,
how to approach masters in the Philippines when you want to go train with them, all that kind of stuff.
That's what I mean. So we haven't gotten into the Philippine hopping, island hopping, and all your weapon collection. So, folks that are watching, this is there will be a part 2. It's gonna be next Wednesday at 8, but we still got more to go here. But just to let you folks know. Yeah. Okay. So, what led you? So you're loving and enjoying Kombatan. What led you to? How'd you come about? Finding KI, Kiro, how that all come about?
Yeah, so when we went to the Philippines in 2000, I think it was 2012, maybe in 2013, but we went there, and Jay Ignacio, who did the Bladed Hand documentary. Yeah. So we became really good friends with him. We brought him into the States. Our group brought him into the States, and he did the DC thing, and he did something in Kansas or Colorado too, unveiling and premiering his DVD, right? So we got to know him pretty well, and so we arranged where he would take us pretty much to all these grandmasters that were in that video that were live, right? And one of the things, obviously, one of the big things was the Kiro that we wanted to do, and Mong Tony was still alive back then, right? So we went to Luneta Park, and we got to train with him and Coach Arnold, obviously, right? Coach Arnold's always been the one that really trains most of the foreigners, so. Got to know him, got to train with him, got to go to the Benondo school that was in old Chinatown there. And that's a unique experience, that we got invited to that school. A couple of times we were able to go there. We ended up training probably with the KI group more than any other group that we trained with. We met Yuli Romo in that trip and everything else.
Oh my God, what a treasure, huh?
Yeah, pretty much it was like a tour to meet everybody, that was in that documentary.
Yuli Romo.
Yeah. Bert Labanego we met with, so I cherish all those stories because they're all different stories that I have, with them. Some of them I trained with. Yuli Roman I didn't train with, but I sat on the balcony with him. It was his birthday party in his balcony, right? And he's out there having a cigarette in the balcony. It's only like 2 foot by 6 foot or whatever. And he's having a cigarette. I don't smoke. And I'm sitting there myself. Here I am sitting on the balcony with Yuli Roman. Of course, back then I had heard all your stories, and I was in awe or whatever, right? It's just me and him, and we're not talking about martial arts or anything. We're just talking, right? So you can't, those are stories you just can't.
Yeah, you can't. I know you're never the experience alone, right?
Yeah, I didn't train with him, but I got the experience, And most of when you go on these kind of tours, we'll talk about the next time. But you go on these tours, you're going to get essences of people and be able to touch hands with people, and that's all you're really going to get.
I gotta get over there. Just so way overdue. So when you began training there, far as Kiro and all that, so what attracted you? What made you want to continue with them and continue deeper into KI?
I think it's obvious that it's a great style, and it did back then. You think about it, it was still it had a mystique about it, right? It's not that it doesn't; it still has a mystique about it, right? But it had a mystique about it, and you heard things about KI, how great of a style it was, And I think honestly, the reason I stuck with it was, and my interest stayed there was 2 reasons: was Alex Ursha, right? And my friendship I had with him, and he could dissect the stuff he could translate between Kombatan and KI, right? He could do that translation for me, and also Coach Arnold, right? I still remember from 2012, and the coach has always been like this: is he always has a smile on his face when he's training, and that's when I came back from the Philippines. That's the thing I remembered most was a smile, right? And I've been bringing him and Peachy back over here in 2015, I think. Brought them over, and continued to train with them, and then Montoni passed away, and then I continued with Coach, because he's really the one that I think has the best grasp over everything.
So then, all right, and you're still trained there. So just this kind of same question I have along with Elric, and And basically what it is just to compare and contrast between the two of them, the similarities, differences,
Yeah.
what can you say on that?
So it's one of those things where if you look from an outsider's point of view, you're going to see differences mainly, right? But when you're doing both styles, the similarities are going to come out, right? So there'll be similarities. They'll still have the cruzadas, which are heavy in Negro styles. They'll still have like to go with the force, techniques, the police techniques, they'll still their Heradas will be different. They'll still have the ochos down. They'll still have the which is their they'll still have all of this and planchada and all this kind of stuff. They call it different names, but they'll all still be there. They'll still have the sangeets. They'll apply it differently, but the stances will be similar. And because Negro styles will bring that left foot forward sometimes, I'm comfortable going into that medium range, right? So again, it's one of those things where it's more of a feel thing and doing the range than it is to say a specific technique, right? That it is, right? Because the cruzada is going to be different. In KI you're going to use the back right. of your blade, right? And in Negros you're not going to use the back of your blade to do a cruzada, for instance, right? So this little things like that are going to be technically different, but they're still sword arts. One's going to be a longer sword, it's going to be a Zanzibar basically, right? Another one's going to be a Taliban, right? So the length of the weapon is going to be different. So you're going to have different techniques come out, but the ranging is going to still be there. The use of the dagger is still going to be there, so all that's still going to be there. This still is a workhorse, so all that's still similar. It's one of those things where I couldn't say like one thing, it's just I see all the similarities because I do both.
No, I mean, basically what I'm hearing from you in summation is that, and as far as your lens and your journey, it seems like there was a compliment to one another.
It is. If I was to say like a Kombatan with Serrata, I would say there's the similarities aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
Even though some people would say KI and Serrata are similar, right? I see them as two different things.
I don't see people. Yeah. People say that, and I'm not jumping there, but I don't see it.
Yeah, that'll be the next episode answering all the questions. Yeah, because I don't see this because I understand the differences. I see the differences more because again the differences are glaring to me, right? And when I see differences between Kombatan and KI, the differences aren't glaring. There's more similarities that I see because they still are very, very good with sword. And when you have an art that's good with sword orientation and understanding how the sword moves and everything, then they're going to be similar. They're going to protect. KI doesn't have the edge protection. They don't really care about the edge. But if you look at the swords that they would use in Negros, they're not fancy.
So then they don't care about the edge, is what you're saying?
Yeah, they wouldn't have the edge retention like you would have in KI, right? So that would be a big glaring difference, right? But again, the swords are different, right? They're not going to be near as fancy. So
yeah, they don't worry about it. If they don't care about their edge and just,
they don't care about it. Yeah.
This is interesting. When you make that mention that they didn't care about going edge to edge, was there at that point though? Does it also parallel the system, or in the system, that immediately whoever gets that hand in there and breaks the bind, went home probably?
I don't know. Like I said, I don't think if the swords are different too. Their spines are made differently, right? Too. So a lot of times you'll find them chisel cut, So the edge will be different, right? And sometimes stronger, So they wouldn't care about that. And some of the old swords I have, like the barongs, I will see sometimes I'll see barongs that are like have edge damage, I'll see Chris's will have edge damage sometimes, not too many. I don't think about the Talibans. I don't see a whole lot with edge damage, So I think the way they made them are stronger, Again, some of them are chisel cut, and some of them are thicker spines.
Gotcha.
I don't know. So
yeah, it's just curious. I
just know that they don't really care about that,
Yeah, it doesn't. Perhaps not. I mean, it doesn't sound like it. What I wouldn't mind seeing more demos if you guys are okay with, just some of the double stick material, like if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah. I can show you something.
All right.
Let you do something. let you do some of the double stuff. Yeah. So this is like a couple of our double stick stuff. So this is our first one, double stick number 1. These learns simultaneous blocking the fence, basically. Number 2, you learn how to do an inside block, basically, and come back and strike. Inside block, come back. Then you learn 3, learns 1, 2, 3, combining them. Then he learns that's some of the basic entries, right? So you can take that entry now and apply it to anything. So you can do an ocho down, which is our X down with it. So you go ocho up with it now. You can do an inside block now with a bonda. So but the idea here is that he needs to be able to be in the middle of all this and apply anything, right? So if I start striking here, if I start striking here, these blows, he's got to be able to pop into that. Does that make sense? So whatever comes, he's got to be able to take over, right? So that's an example of our double stick. So his left hand is just as strong as his right hand. Nice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No. Thank you. No, that was enjoyable. Thank you. So folks that are watching, yes, we're going to be doing a part 2, which will be next Wednesday at 8. That is going to definitely be on the focus of his trips over there, as well as his weapon collection. But before we do what other systems have you trained in? Maybe not to the extent of KI or Kombatan, but
within FMA.
What's that?
Within FMA?
Sure.
Yeah, Blintwalk.
Okay.
Lightning Scientific. Some of the different Negro styles, right? Some of them have names, some of them don't. So we train with Felix Guanabo over there. He's got his own little system over there that he does. I've done some with Mila's husband, Cayenne. I've done some of the Laguna systems there, with Anthony and Bayette. So just dabbled in everything, right? But the ones I really have knowledge in, to any extent really, is KI and the Kombatan. Blintwalk, I feel like I know fairly well, just because it's so similar to our modern aspects of stuff. So I don't see it as being that different. Our modern is going to be different. How we approach our single stick is going to be slightly different, right? So sorry, got me talking.
No problem.
So we'll have all the throws that you normally would have, right? You'll have a Harada series that will come across with Harada, as we do it. But you'll notice one thing for us is that we'll try to, it's not so much, block it. There you go, block it. So more like this. There you go, more like KI, more like one right? There you go. Right? So we'll kind of take those pauses out or whatever, right? So all of our stuff is going to be back to our what we call freestyle, which are free up style, right? So I'll come through the whistle. Okay? So anything I do is react also. There you go. And he'll just react off of it, right? So we'll just play with anything. So if you know it's free up style. So if I wanted to put KI in there, there's my fillet, my fillet, right? There's my fillet, right? So I can put any style in there that I wanted to, right? So that's our base playground. So that's pretty much for our advanced levels, but any technique I want to throw in there, I can, and I can play with it.
Awesome.
But that's dynamic, right? It starts out as a baseline, but it becomes very, very, very dynamic. So he tried to go for a while.
You mentioned one style. I kind of agree with you that I would like to that piques my interest, other than everything else, is lightning.
Yep.
Lightning side.
Mhm.
What appeals to you about that system?
They hit hard. That's what I appreciate about lightning is that they're hard hitters. It's not a complex art, but the complexity always comes in the use of it, right? But they hit hard. That's what I appreciated about the lightning scientific stuff. So when I first met Mongbert Labanego, he's passed away now. I met him. He's small, man. He's like, I don't know, maybe 80 pounds soaking wet when I met him, right? But he's known as one of the old guys, right? He was with Mong Ben for a long time, and before they had the breakup and everything. So he's highly skilled. And he brought me up there to do a demonstration. We're training with them. Roosters are in the background or whatever. And he brings me up and he wants me to hit with him, right? So hit, block. And so I'm like, okay, I don't want to be a puss, right? So I want to hit kind of hard, but not too hard, right? Because I'm thinking he's an 80-year-old man or whatever, right? And so he looks at me and goes, do you have another stick? I go, yeah. So I grabbed another stick. He didn't want to break his stick, okay? But he starts swinging on me, okay? And he starts just wailing on me, And I'm thinking to myself, I hope this old man stops soon because he's killing me, So I got an appreciation for that, right? Okay. Of that hard hitting, and it wasn't earth shattering to me because we do that within Kombatan. We'll flat take your head off with a swing, right? And you have to get used to blocking that because that's reality, right? But lightning scientific I appreciate for that reason, but it's not for me. It's not different enough, for me to chase after it. I have a lot of friends who do lightning scientific, and I have a ton of respect for the style, but it's just not different enough for me.
No, right? No, that totally makes sense. Okay, yeah, well said. Yeah. So what? So we're like, just because I'm going to cover some of this stuff, so when we do the part 2, we can just kind of focus in on your trips over there and your blade collection. So what are your goals, like for you, your student system, like what's your future?
So everything I do comes from my heart, really, honestly, right? And what I'm about to say comes from my heart too. Is that every single thing I do, okay, represents Grandmaster Shelley and importantly Grandmaster Ernesto, right? So everything I do, the students that I develop, the practitioner I am, has to be, a respect to my seniors. Alex Ursha being one of them like that too. All my seniors that were within Kombatan, is that I want to be a good example to them, right? So that's my goal, 100%. Same thing when I train KI, right? Yes, I'm trying to reverse engineer and everything, right? But I want to be a good example to KI. I don't want to be the guy that talks smack or politics or deals with any of that kind of crap, right? Mm-hmm. I just want to be somebody that says Coach Arnold can go, you know what, Dan's a great guy and he's a great practitioner, and I show honor to that art. That's for me, That's everything I do when I train, especially with Kombatan. That's where my heart's at, and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, no.
I don't care about advancement. I don't care about titles. I don't care about rank. I don't care about myself. That's why it's been taking me so long to get on the show, right? Honestly, and same thing why Shelley probably isn't on the show too, because is that we just don't. It's not about us. It's about the art. But sometimes you have to got you so you can present the art.
No. But I mean, the ones that and I'm glad you get, obviously that you came on, and I hope the others do as well. You know what I mean? It sounds like they have something to offer the community and they should be heard. But ultimately up to them.
Yeah.
But what you said you had a fear. One of the reasons why you came on, you're sensing a fear, or you want to have the curve, so to speak, be proactive, as far as potentially it dying out, or not.
Yeah, so Kombatan is one of his art. Great Grandmaster passed away. Kombatan was taken over by his son, John, right? Ernesto Jr. He's done a good job of creating it, right? But our flavor of Kombatan we've always been unique. We've always been when we came back, there was a time where we weren't with Kombatan. When we came back to Kombatan, right? When our Great Grandmaster was alive. we came back, but we wanted to be our own guys, right? Or do our own thing, you know, and not deal with all the politics that came with it or whatever, right? So for us, that's, you know, because we want to honor great grandmasters art the way we do it and the best way we do it, right? And Kombatan, because sometimes it gets caught up in that flashiness of everything, right? And the double stick, and if you don't have somebody out there pushing what Kombatan is, then the art dies, you know. And great grandmaster created this wonderful art, you know. And same thing, I'm sure, you know, the Remy side of the family is trying to do too. They're trying to preserve modern Ernese, right? You know, so we're trying to preserve the idea of what Kombatan is, you know, and the great art that it is, because it really is it's a great art. It's powerful art, you know.
Well, it sounds like it's in good hands with you guys, and hopefully you'll be able to preserve it and continue it with like the likes of your students and what have you. There's, you know, it's sad, you know, this has come up before in previous shows, you know, maybe in different sections or aspects, but just as some of these systems, you know, like I look at, and I hate to bring this system up, but it's the one that just comes to my mind immediately. Like I look at Lameko, as far as backyard group Lameko, and it doesn't look good in the future. And of course, I hope I'm wrong, but and it's just sad. Some of these systems that like maybe a decade, 2 decades from now are going to be, ooh, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's hard, you know, because you want to preserve the arts. There's certain things that we do, you know, and, you know, certain things I don't, you know, I kind of get, you know, some of the guys in Florida will know this, right? I get craps on some guys because I don't share some things, right? And I'm not trying to be secretive really, right? But it's one of those things where there has to be a base to it, you know, for you to understand what I'm going to give you, right? So it's one of those things where I want to give you something about, you know, that's great, you know, but you're not ready for it sometimes, and wouldn't appreciate it if I gave it to you, right? So that's not the reason on that, right? And I paid a big price for it, right? So sometimes I don't want you to take it and I don't want you to take pieces of it.
No.
Because you take pieces of it, you ruin the art. You know, that's the problem with jack of all trades. We've kind of become that, unfortunately. You know,
like, oh, you know, I went to the summer, I took this piece and I put it in my system. All right. Well.
That's why, you know, I had an interesting conversation with a guy out west, you know, about swords in general, you know, and somebody recommended me start talking to him, him talking to me rather. And the sword tells the truth of what the system really is, you know, and the sword came first and then the system came, right? So, you know, yes, some people may develop swords afterwards or whatever, but the sword from that region is going to tell you what the motions are, and it's going to tell you what the footwork is going to be. And it's going to tell you everything about that system, you know. And when you start making a hodgepodge of everything, you know, then the stick becomes every single sword, you know. And
to make up the deficits of the knowledge. There you go.
Yeah. You lose it.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Wow. That was profound. What that guy told you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the most profound things I've heard on here. That's
what I told him that. But but you know, it's one of those things where it's a sword. The sword tells you the truth of everything, you know. And that's why I told him that's why I collect swords, you know, is because again they're helping me to reverse engineer what I already know, you know.
That's awesome. Awesome. Which next episode we're going to be getting into all that.
Yeah. And swords are an interesting thing.
I had a feeling that this was going to be 2. I had a feeling.
Yeah.
Instead of squeezing stuff in, and you know, just you know, I really want you to showcase, you know, what you got instead of cutting corners. You know. So,
yeah.
I'm glad we chose to do the 2. So any you know, again, folks, if you jumped in late, there will be a part 2. It's going to be next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, same time, all that. So in that episode, Maestro Dan will be speaking on his trips to the Philippines, as well as showing his antique blades and discussing them as far as the regions and what have you. And I think that's going to be fascinating. I'm looking forward to it anyhow. Any closing thoughts before we see each other again next week?
That I can think of.
Nope. I think we'll look forward to meeting her, you know, doing everything again. So.
Yeah. And hopefully we see each other again, both of you, in February at Chad's camp. That would be nice.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
Now seeing some of this stuff and hearing some of this stuff, I'm going to be kind of following you around.
Yeah, do it for sure. I keep quiet, so it's kind of funny, people don't realize until they start talking sometimes,
Yeah. I'm believe me, I'm a fun man. I want.
And sometimes you
I wanna
can't
be
get him to
both.
shut up. He just keeps going.
Yeah. All right.
It's like, look at the time. I got to get going. No, we got to train some more.
Yeah.
Come on, you've been talking this so loud. All right, you guys. Well, I appreciate both. Those demos were fantastic. Thank you for coming on, Pat, helping them out. Appreciate it. Nice seeing you again. And Maestro, again, this was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think the second one's gonna sounds like it's gonna be just as good.
Yep.
And well, hopefully you guys will go inside to some air conditioning and
We will. We're used to it in Florida. If you go to the Philippines, Mal, get used to it. It's brutal. It's hot.
that's what they say. Paul was telling me, Paul Rosales was telling me,
Yeah.
Florida kind of the equivalent to.
It's the same. If you're walking in the woods in Mindanao and you walk in the woods in Florida, it'd be the same. They have mountains is all.
That's all. Wow. So that's why that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, you guys. Thanks again, and we'll see you in a week.
All right, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. All right. That was a good one. And I think the next one's going to be just as good with all those antique weapons. All right. So who is next before Chad? Oh my gosh, I got Chad in my mind. Before we have Master Dan back, and I'm trying to look now. Who could it be? We're just waiting to hear back from colors, but there's going to be a few. Looks like I might get squeezed in a PTK theme episode in there. I think Tom Pena has somebody. Yeah, but you guys will see in that discussion. All right, folks. Thanks for those who jumped in. And again, check out that raffle. It's for a good cause for Jesse of FMA Pulse. Try to get his equipment back. Again, all you need to go is to FMA discussion. The post is pinned. Here it is. $10 a ticket. Bram Frank, again, like I said in the beginning of the episode, $1,100 worth of knives, some crimpets, Magnum standard fixed blades. I mean, just really went overboard as far as his donations. Couple books from Bregalong, from Bernas Dakata's book, which I believe I have here. That one there, and some other stuff. I think some weapons. I think Brian Rodriguez donated a weapon or what have you. But yeah, so check that out. $10 a ticket. Okay, it's going for a good cause. All right, I will see you next time.